What if Ukraine's war is not lost in a single spectacular clash, but slowly, almost invisibly, suffocated, one blackout at a time? Imagine if the collapse does not come with the thunder of artillery, but with the quiet, relentless extinguishing of light after light, as an entire nation is pushed to the brink, not by a single overwhelming blow, but by 1,000 small cuts. This is the war of attrition, a contest of exhaustion, waged ruthlessly behind the headlines, where the fate of millions is determined not just by battles, but by the slow erosion of hope, infrastructure, and willpower. Right now, as you watch or listen to this, Russia is methodically tightening its grip on Ukraine. Each week brings new precision strikes. Missiles and drones batter power stations, substations, railway junctions, and supply depots. The energy grid, once the invisible engine of modern life, is battered and failing. Railways, lifeblood for supplies and reinforcements, are disrupted or destroyed. Across Ukraine, rolling blackouts are no longer a rare emergency, but a daily ordeal. In cities once bustling with life, factories now lie silent, trains freeze on pitch-dark tracks, neighborhoods huddle in the cold, and entire cities endure hours, sometimes days, without power or any real hope that the light will soon return. This is not just a campaign of explosive force. It is a war of exhaustion, deliberate and systematic. Fuel stocks shrink, ammunition depots dwindle, and Ukraine's manpower is stretched thinner with each week. The tone of official statements has shifted. Where once there were bold promises of victory, now there are subtle allusions to the need for a pause, a truce, or any respite from the grinding attrition. The vocabulary has changed, from confidence to caution, from offense to grim endurance. Meanwhile, out of public sight, in distant capitals and behind guarded doors, international negotiations gather pace. Secret drafts and proposals pass between powerful hands. These confidential conversations are not just about the battle for Ukraine's borders, but about redrawing the political map of Europe itself. Deals are being sketched that could determine the fate of tens of millions, all without another shot being fired. The fate of a nation could be decided not on the battlefield, but in quiet rooms, with signatures rather than gunfire. Overlooking these subtle shifts is not just a mistake, it is a real danger. The cost is not just confusion, but vulnerability. When you miss the quiet turning points in a crisis like this, you lose clarity, you lose influence, and you lose the ability to protect your own interests as the shockwaves ripple across continents. Europe's security, global energy markets, the credibility of alliances, all are at stake, balanced on a knife's edge. To really understand how a modern war can be choked rather than crushed, let's rewind the tape and expose the political and battlefield realities that have brought Ukraine to this precarious moment. Let's trace the origins of this slow-motion siege and see how each strategic blow, far from the front lines, has brought the country closer to the brink of collapse. You might imagine war as a storm of explosions, tank battles, and frontline chaos. But in the 21st century, the most decisive attacks are often invisible. Russia is severing Ukraine's vital lifelines far from the fighting. The real battlefield is in the shadows, where power lines cross a nation, where railway junctions direct the flow of supplies, where internet cables keep command centers connected. When these are targeted, entire cities are plunged into darkness, commerce grinds to a halt, and even the best-equipped army is left stranded in silence. In just the last few weeks, Moscow has switched tactics. Instead of pouring resources into relentless shelling at the front, it now focuses on Ukraine's energy and logistics infrastructure. Consider this. In a single week, at least 7 major strikes have shattered power stations, substations, and key supply nodes. In the city of Kryvyi Rih, for example, a major substation, the train station, and the airport were all hit within hours. In the Chernihiv region, officials now have to officially announce when electricity will be available, sometimes for just 2 or 3 hours a day, because there simply is not enough power to go around. Where once turbines spun and cities glowed, now there is only silence or the smell of black smoke. This is paralysis on a national scale. Rolling blackouts now sweep through both cities and villages, affecting everyone from frontline soldiers to schoolchildren in rural areas. Electricity is rationed to just a handful of hours each day, while long nights stretch on without even basic light or heat. This is not merely inconvenient. Factories cannot produce needed weapons or basic goods. Hospitals struggle to keep life-saving equipment running, railway lines freeze, and communications falter. With every new strike, the grid weakens, and the risk of total collapse grows. The breakdown is everywhere. Armies run on fuel, trains run on power, and people run on hope. Now, trains stall on darkened tracks, supply convoys are delayed or destroyed, and fuel shortages become routine. In some regions, officials warn that there is not enough electricity for even the bare essentials. The war effort itself is at risk. Without energy, even the most modern armies are forced to a standstill, their vehicles silent, their radios dead, their soldiers cold and hungry. Ukrainian leaders are sounding the alarm. The Minister of Energy calls the situation extremely difficult, an understatement when entire regions sit in the dark. Military commanders have done the unthinkable, openly asking for a pause in fighting. Ukraine's top general now admits there simply are no fresh reserves to sustain the current tempo. Ammunition is scarce, armored vehicles are wearing out, and there are few replacement troops left to call up. On the front lines, the pressure is relentless and growing. Take the urban battles in Kupiansk and Pokrovsk. In Kupiansk, Russian troops now claim control over nearly 70% of the city, a place that, just months ago, was considered relatively safe. The fighting is constant, supply lines are under fire, and every attempted counterattack bleeds away the last of Ukraine's strength. In Pokrovsk, Ukrainian soldiers cling desperately to their final positions, often fighting with outdated weapons and improvised defenses. The roads to the city are dangerous, armored vehicles are scarce, and Russian drones hunt anything that moves or carries supplies. Historical parallels abound. During the Second World War, for instance, the German siege of Leningrad did not succeed by storming the city's defenses, but by systematically cutting off supplies. The resulting starvation and cold killed hundreds of thousands, not bullets or bombs. Today, the tactic is more sophisticated, using precision drones and missiles instead of artillery and blockades. But the principle is the same: starve the enemy into submission. The support system behind the lines is also buckling. European aid arrives slowly, delayed by bureaucratic wrangling and political disagreements. Domestic resources are stretched past the breaking point. Soldiers' pay is increasingly uncertain, dependent on Western aid packages that remain snarled in foreign politics. Even more telling, Ukrainian leaders are now openly debating lowering the draft age to 18, a desperate step that signals just how thin Ukraine's ranks have become. In previous conflicts, such a move has often been a sign that a nation's reserves are exhausted, a last-ditch attempt to hold the line. If we focus only on daily headlines, who holds which village, who lost which piece of ground, we miss the deeper danger. This is now a war against infrastructure and morale. The real battlefield is shifting into the shadows, where the slow destruction of power lines and supply routes could decide not just Ukraine's future, but the stability of Europe itself. For example, the bombing of the Pavlohrad chemical plant did not make international headlines, but by crippling a key industrial node, it disrupted supply chains for miles around. The effects of such strikes ripple outward, affecting not just Ukraine, but neighboring countries dependent on Ukrainian exports. The struggle now runs deeper than bombed-out buildings or battered maps. It is a race against exhaustion, a test of who can endure longer, who can hold on as the fabric of daily life unravels. The next phase will unfold in hidden pressures and secret bargains, shaping the fate of the entire region. The outcome will not be determined by a single battle, but by a series of small defeats and slow surrenders, many of which happen far from the eyes of the world. But the battle behind the headlines is even more complex than it seems. As the official narrative phrase, new actors and hidden agendas begin to shape the direction of the conflict. Powerful local leaders, such as Odessa's mayor, have begun openly defying Kiev, exposing rifts that threaten national unity. With each blackout and battlefield loss, these fractures spread, raising the specter of a broader collapse in governance. In previous wars, such as the breakup of Yugoslavia in the 1990s, similar local defiance led to the fragmentation of entire countries. The risk is real, and history offers grim reminders of what can happen when unity fails in the midst of crisis. When darkness sweeps over half a nation, how long before the front lines themselves begin to buckle? Ukraine's war is no longer fought only against Russian missiles and drones. The enemy is also exhaustion. At the front, units are battered, short on equipment, and running perilously low on morale. Commanders in Kyiv now debate lowering the draft age to 18, a move that would have seemed unimaginable just months prior. In the Vietnam War, as American draftees grew younger and less experienced, morale collapsed, and the war effort unraveled. Similar dynamics could play out in Ukraine if the current trends continue. For those still in uniform, the daily reality grows harsher. Soldiers' pay now depends entirely on delayed Western aid packages. Without these funds, wages go unpaid, critical supplies vanish, and frontline troops are left exposed and underpowered. The Ukrainian war machine, once driven by hope and international backing, now lurches forward with vital parts missing and reserves nearly spent. At home, fissures widen in the nation's political armor. The stress of war is not just felt at the front. Ordinary citizens endure rationed electricity, job losses, and the constant fear of sudden attacks. In many households, family members have been called up for multiple tours of duty, and the strain on communities is visible everywhere, from empty classrooms to shuttered businesses. During the Iraq War, the breakdown of infrastructure led to similar social fragmentation, as communities struggled to cope with basic shortages. External pressure mounts as well. Ukraine's international partners, especially the United States and the European Union, now insist on tough governance reforms, and even float the idea of early elections, demands nearly impossible to fulfill in wartime. In Kyiv's elite circles, conversations once considered heresy now surface. Calls for a ceasefire, proposals for territorial concessions, and tentative steps toward talks with Moscow. These shifts signal a leadership boxed in by relentless pressure and vanishing options. The gravest danger is that this crisis might not unfold slowly. Should Ukraine's vulnerabilities go unaddressed, collapse could come abruptly and irreversibly, undermining Ukraine itself and shaking the very foundations of Western alliances and global trust. The fall of Saigon in 1975 is a historical example. For years, the South Vietnamese government appeared to be holding on, but when its support systems failed, the collapse was sudden and catastrophic. As Ukraine's resolve is strained by fatigue and division, Russia recalibrates its strategy, preferring patience and precision to brute speed. But beneath the surface maneuvers and public rhetoric, a far more dangerous game is unfolding, one that could redraw borders and upend the global order. What happens when war becomes a battle of endurance, and who has the power to set the rules? Ukraine's defenses are wearing thin. Exhaustion is everywhere, visible in both soldiers and civilians. The days of rapid advances are gone. Instead, Russian intelligence has adopted a new tempo, a series of methodical, precisely timed strikes. These attacks are not about spectacle, but about sapping Ukraine's ability to resist, one vital node at a time. Historical examples show how wars of attrition can be decisive. During the Korean War, United Nations forces and North Korean armies fought back and forth, but it was the exhaustion of reserves, not the loss of ground, that shaped the outcome. Similarly, in Ukraine, the bombing of industrial nodes like the Pavlohrad chemical plant is not meant to make headlines. It is strategic, aimed at crippling infrastructure, poisoning supply chains, and closing off escape routes for any future counteroffensive. Beneath each blackout and every broken rail lies a deeper truth. Western involvement is more entangled than ever. Spare components for critical infrastructure often arrive through shadowy channels. Technical advisors from Europe and the United States slip into Ukraine under cover of darkness. These covert efforts draw Europe further in, inch by inch, raising the risk that what happens next will not stay confined to Ukrainian borders. The Balkan Wars of the 1990s showed how external involvement can escalate regional conflicts into international crises. Diplomacy now moves in hushed, urgent tones. Talks once considered impossible are quietly underway. Whispers circulate of secret discussions involving Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, and Volodymyr Zelensky, with Budapest floated as neutral ground. But Putin's terms are strict. There will be no grandstanding, no theatrics. Only real, technical groundwork will lay the path to any future summit. The message is clear: substance over spectacle, or nothing at all. Europe watches from the sidelines, increasingly powerless. The most consequential decisions, those that could redraw maps or end the fighting, may soon be made in closed rooms, far from Brussels or Berlin. European leaders risk waking up to a new reality, their influence spent while new spheres of power are carved without their say. This scenario echoes the Yalta Conference at the end of the Second World War, where decisions about borders and spheres of influence were made by a few, while millions were left to live with the consequences. The world now balances on the edge of a silent transformation. The rules are shifting in real time, and those who fail to see it risk being left behind. Yet one question lingers. Can ordinary people alter this course, or are these choices sealed by distant hands? History suggests that sometimes public pressure or unexpected events can disrupt even the most secretive negotiations. The fall of the Berlin Wall, for example, was not planned in diplomatic backrooms, but triggered by the actions of millions of ordinary people demanding change. If the terms of peace or surrender are set in secret, what happens to those left outside the room? The answer may determine not just Ukraine's fate, but the shape of Europe's future. If the next phase of this conflict is unfolding in silence, what early warnings can you catch before the headlines break the surface? Look beyond official statements. Track sudden shifts in infrastructure, mysterious blackouts, damaged railways, idle factories. Patterns matter: recurring outages, rationed electricity, or diplomatic meetings that happen quietly, with minimal public explanation. In the run-up to the annexation of Crimea in 2014, the warning signs were visible to those who watched troop movements and transport disruptions, even before politicians acknowledged the crisis. Modern wars rarely end with dramatic battles or televised surrenders. Increasingly, outcomes are shaped by slow, invisible erosion of will, resources, and systems. The real front lines are hidden: strained logistics, waning morale, and the gradual exhaustion of entire economies. During the Soviet-Afghan War, for instance, it was not a single engagement, but years of attrition that ultimately broke the Soviet will to fight. Resilience is now the decisive factor. Economic stability, trustworthy information, and psychological endurance have become the new high ground. Consider the British home front during the Blitz in the Second World War. Victory depended less on battlefield success than on the ability of civilians to endure relentless stress and disruption. Today, the contest is about surviving, adapting, and holding firm under constant pressure, not just seizing territory. Beware any narrative promising quick triumphs or tidy endings. Focus on what escapes the spotlight: sudden changes in recruitment age, unexpected talks about ceasefires, leaders choosing caution in their words. Fatigue, negotiation, and systemic weakness appear first in overlooked details. A wise observer watches these signals, not just the headlines. For businesses and individuals alike, brace for the aftershocks. Supply chains may buckle without warning, energy shortages can leap borders, and alliances might realign overnight. In the early months of the COVID-19 pandemic, many companies and households were caught off guard because they failed to see the global supply chain disruptions coming. Anticipating these ripples is crucial to avoid being blindsided in markets or daily routines. Failing to adjust your expectations and plans leaves you exposed to abrupt escalations, shifting security realities, or economic upheaval. Adaptation is not just prudent, it is essential. For example, after the oil shocks of the 1970s, Those who diversified their energy sources survived while others struggled. Today, similar adaptability is required to navigate the uncertainties of war and international turmoil. In this silent war, information is your first line of defense. The next chapter may be written quietly, but its consequences will not stay hidden for long. Monitor government advisories, follow credible independent reporting, and cultivate networks that can provide advance warning of disruptions. Consider how the rise of social media helped ordinary Egyptians organize during the Arab Spring. Information was power, and those who had it could act, while others were left reacting. History's true turning points are rarely obvious, until they have already changed everything. What seems like a grinding stalemate in Ukraine is, in fact, a critical battle unfolding right now, but it is being fought in ways most will never see. Blackouts, fuel shortages, and secret negotiations happening far from television cameras. The clues are scattered, hidden from casual view, visible only to those who know where to look. In the run-up to the fall of the Soviet Union, for example, few noticed the mounting economic crises and regional unrest, until the entire system collapsed in a matter of months. Ignore these subtle shifts, and you risk being blindsided when the real pivot arrives. Economic shocks, security threats, and sudden power vacuums do not wait for headlines. They ripple silently outward, upending supply chains, spiking energy prices, and threatening your own safety in ways you may not recognize until it is far too late. The Asian financial crisis of 1997 began with small currency devaluations but quickly engulfed entire economies, affecting millions who never saw it coming. This is not a distant crisis. It is a warning, an urgent call to pay attention to the changes roiling beneath the surface of global affairs. Do not rely on dramatic news flashes or official reassurances. Instead, monitor infrastructure changes, abrupt shifts in policy, and the quiet choreography of back-channel diplomacy. The real contests for power are playing out in the shadows, shaping the future before anyone thinks to look. So, what can you do? Stay vigilant. Seek out nuanced, trustworthy sources. Challenge simple narratives and dig below the surface for the deeper story. Prepare your finances, your security, and your worldview for the reality that slow-burn crises can erupt without warning. If you are a business owner, consider diversifying your supply chains and building contingency plans. If you are an ordinary citizen, maintain personal emergency supplies and stay connected with your community. Waiting for the dust to settle means letting others decide your future for you. History remembers those who recognized the tipping points and acted. In the end, the question is not just what will happen in Ukraine, but whether you will notice the signs, adapt, and prepare. The world is watching. Will you be among those who are ready for the change when it comes?